Hello and welcome to Curator for Camera with me, Andrew McClean, Head Curator of the National Rail Museum in York. But today, we're not in York, we're across the border in Glasgow. We're at the fantastic Riverside Museum, where we're going to look at the celebrated Caledonian Railway locomotive with the easy to remember number 123. So here we are standing in front of the Caledonian Railway Single Locomotive number 123, or Caley 123 for short. Now this is a locomotive I've probably known all my life. The very first model locomotive I got from my model railway was a version of this. That was back in the 1970s. In my house as well there was a painting by my late grandfather of this locomotive, so I've always been familiar with it. But why was it so famous even then in the 1970s, which was around about 90 years after it had first been built? Well, actually this locomotive was famous from the very start. This locomotive was completely unique. It had been built by the Glasgow company Nielsen & Co. in 66 days. It was actually built for exhibition in Edinburgh in 1886, the famous international exhibition looking at industry, science and the arts. Between May and October of that year, over 2.7 million people came to visit it. And amongst those visitors was Queen Victoria herself. And such an impression did the locomotive make that it actually won a gold medal for its appearance at that particular exhibition. Later on, it would show that it wasn't just pretty face, it was very much a working locomotive of some repute, because in 1888 it took part in the famous railway races to the north. This was a very exciting period in railway history because there was much competition for the lucrative London to Scotland route, and there were two competing networks, the London to Edinburgh East Coast Main Line and the London to Glasgow also to Edinburgh West Coast Main Line. And in August 1888, the competing companies decided to ramp up their timetables to improve the speeds and attracted huge publicity in the process. And those races went from Monday to Saturday every week throughout August. And on the West Coast Main Line, the undoubted star of the show was this locomotive behind me, because it is the only locomotive across all the companies to have taken part in every day of the races. And this locomotive would take over the train from the London North Western Railway at Carlisle, just over the border in England. And it would take the train up to Edinburgh, going up the very steep slope of Beatwick Summit. That's over 1,000 feet in height, 315 metres or so. And it was due to get into Edinburgh in 122 minutes, but every day beat that target by some distance, including on the 9th of August, doing it in 102 minutes. And in fact, trains on that route today only do that journey around about 20 minutes quicker, so a huge achievement.
It is at Her Majesty's Scottish home Balmoral Castle that the royal family will be staying. At nearby Ballater Station, the royal party is welcomed by the Marquis of Aberdeen before they continue their journey by car.
But most importantly, it serves as the royal pilot. Now what that meant was every time that Queen Victoria came to Scotland to spend time at Balmoral, she would come by royal train. But a pilot locomotive would go ahead of the royal train 15 minutes before to ensure that the rails were safe. It was fast, it was graceful, it looked fantastic, it was the perfect locomotive to pioneer the royal train through on its way up to Scotland. And then finally, in the 1960s, it became a key exhibit in the new Glasgow Transport Museum, where it still is today, albeit in the new premises here down at the Riverside by the banks of the River Clyde. So let's have a look around this locomotive. But first of all, we're actually going to start with the wheels, because there's something very important about this engine, about the wheel arrangement of it. Now, as we come round, we'll see here we've got 4 leading wheels. There's a bit of a gap between them. But it's the wheel in the middle that's really significant here, because this is a single locomotive, which means it's got a single pair of driving wheels, one on either side. And these are ginormous. We're only seeing half of it here, but as we go up, you'll see this box here. The rest of the wheel is behind there. That's 7 feet in diameter, that wheel. So that's why it's called a Caley single. But we're going to come round and just have a look at some of the detail on the engine, because actually it's the detail that makes this locomotive so fantastic. So it does have some fine embellishments. You'll see the burnished metalwork here around the smoke box. That's quite unusual. A lot of effort has gone into this locomotive to make it look the best. So you come up from the chimney, you'll see there the headboard, the Royal Pilot train. That's the kind of board it would take when it was piloting Queen Victoria's train. And we come down to the dart and handle. In this case it's a wheel, that sort of central boss on the smoke box door. Isn't it beautiful? That star shape. And you've got these little things that look a bit like candlestick holders that are coming out. Again, really beautiful the way that they are designed to fit on the engine. These are actually displacement lubricators. So as you see, you put the oil into the top, and then steam would be released from the regulator inside the cab of the locomotives. That would come through the pipe. It would start to displace the oil, so the oil could come down and lubricate what's beneath. So we have the cylinders are inside this locomotive. In fact, to get access there, handy little hatch, hence the little handles. And as we come round, one of the very fine details of this locomotive on the front of the splashes here over the wheels. And you'll see there the thistle. Now the thistle is very important. That's the plant symbol of Scotland. And of course this is a Scottish locomotive for a Scottish railway company. But you've also got the thistle sitting on top of the 2 roses here, symbolic of England, because Caley 123 did go down as far south as England into Carlisle. So that shows that the Caledonian Railway was a cross-border railway too. And the buffer's pretty plain now, but during its sort of exhibition phase, and certainly back in the 1950s, there's wonderful photographs of these buffers burnished with the thistle emblem on the buffer itself, which is rather fantastic to see. It'd be lovely to see that happen again, actually. And then you can just see the number, that lovely, easy to remember number 123 from the locomotive. So let's go round the locomotive now to the side. Now look from the front there. Imagine that coming forwards just in front of the Royal train. All the crowds waiting to see Victoria's train come through, and this coming through before that as a prelude. Fantastic looking thing. And let's go round. Not much on the outside of the locomotive. You see the lovely livery here, the lined out black and white on the Caledonian blue. There's different versions of the Caledonian blue. Much debate about what is the accurate colour. So much debate you could write a book about it. In fact, I think somebody actually has. But you do have one valve here, the clack valve, which you'll just see going in behind the sandbox here, which I'm going to come into now because that's really, really important about this engine. This big box here, and you'll see in the top, there's a little sort of hatch there, and that's for putting the sand in, because this whole box that you see above the wheels contains sand, and that's very, very important for this engine, because if we go round a little bit further, you'll see there's a Westinghouse brake system. Now, this is quite famous braking safety system that was developed in 1869 by an American called George Westinghouse. But this braking system also helped provide a blast for the sand. This blast that would put a very fine level of sand underneath the very large driving wheels, and that gave the adhesion sort of necessary for this locomotive to do high speeds going up steep banks like Beatock. Let's come to above the wheels, these ginormous wheels that are behind the box here. And you'll see a maker's plate there, Neilson and Company, Glasgow Works. Now Neilson and Company, like many of the Glasgow locomotive manufacturers, are based in the Springburn area of the city. Very, very famous area for locomotive production. In fact, all those companies amalgamated in the early 20th century to become the North British Locomotive Company, the largest manufacturer of locomotives in Europe. People think about Glasgow, they think about shipbuilding, but it was also very, very famous for locomotive building.
When the world wants fine engineering work, it comes to Britain. I seem to have said that before, but if you want further proof, here it is. Egypt has ordered 26 locomotives for use under the not very ideal conditions of tropical sun and desert sand, and they're on their way.
So moving up from the builder's plate, we're going to go on to the coat of arms here. Now this is a coat of arms of what you'll see there, the Caledonian Railway Company. Well, actually, this is a bit of a con, because the Caledonian Railway Company stole the coat of arms effectively from the Scottish monarch, which at that time, of course, would be Queen Victoria. Because this is the coat of arms of the Scottish kings and queens. This would be the coat of arms of Mary Queen of Scots, for example. And you have to get permission from the Lord Lion, King of Arms, to use any heraldic devices in this country. So Caledonian Railway didn't bother with that. They just went ahead, but managed to get away with it. It says something about the bullishness of that company themselves, that they could take the royal insignia. So you have the lion rampant on the left-hand side, which was the symbol of the Scottish monarchy. And then on the right-hand side, you have the St Andrew's Cross, the saltire, and that's the national flag of Scotland. Come down below the royal crown, you'll see the lion rampant again. And then a bit further down, you'll see the insignia of the Order of the Thistle, including the figure of St Andrew, the patron saint of Scotland. And above that, the motto of the Order of the Thistle, also the motto of the Scottish Royal House, in Latin, Nemo me impune licessit. And that basically means, no one provokes me with impunity. So if you have a go at me, I'll have a go at you back. And in Scots, that was ward or meddle with me, or basically dinna mess. Because if you do, well, the consequences you would not want to know. And actually, during the railway races to the north, it's very symbolic as well that the competition in Scotland was the North British Railway Company. Now, after the Act of Union between Scotland and England, there were many Scots who pined for the days of Scottish independence. But there were many who were staunch unionists and actually believed that Scotland as a concept should no longer exist and it should be called North Britain. So the North British Railway played up to that. You know, we are North Britons, we are not Scots. Whereas Caledonian Railway, of course, uses the name Caledonian from Caledonia, a very ancient name for Scotland. So the two rivals have very different names as well, very, very significant in terms of that. So Caley 123 proudly carrying all this Scottish insignia, which is rather fantastic. And then just as we come up, you'll see the very large dome here. Now that used to have the Ramsbottom safety valves on top of that back in 1886. But later, these were moved to the area here. So that's the Ramsbottom safety valves there. These safety valves, very, very important because locomotives, early locomotives had a habit of blowing up. So this just helps to regulate, make the flow of steam safe. And behind that, you'll see sticking up is the whistle, or the Hooter, the Caley Hooter, as it's often known. Very sort of mellow tones that come out of that particular whistle. And down in the cab side, of course, here we have the company name Caledonian Railway and that lovely number 123. It was renumbered in 1914 to 1123, and then after the LMS took over the Caledonian Railway as part of the amalgamation of railway companies, creating 4 railway companies in 1923, its number was changed again to 14010. And at that point, the locomotive was also changed colour too, to the LMS red, more like a sort of crimson maroony type colour. So it wasn't always blue. In fact, later in its working life, it was painted black as well. So it's had different colours and different numbers, but most famously, 123 is the number by which it's best known. And just to finish off as we go round, you'll see here at the back of the tender, coming down from that beautifully painted lamp, the number again, 123, and there's a nice toolbox just at the back of the tender there, complete with a very secure looking padlock there. So there's a sort of tour of the outside of the locomotive. Now what we're going to do is going to have a look inside the cab and see where all the action happened back in 1888. First impressions are, it's a very tight space, a very small space. You've got a driver on the left-hand side and the fireman working away with the tender behind us here, taking the coal out and basically coming down. Here's the firebox door down here, all closed up today. In those running days in August 1888, imagine the furnace that was in there. The fire as they were coming up Beatock, the firemen working absolutely incredibly hard to get the locomotive up. Let's just come back a little bit and just look at some of the controls, because it's quite compact and basic in here. You have a lot of the gauges that you would expect, of course. You've got up here, there's the vacuum gauge. Come around the gauge for the Westinghouse brake. Looked at the Westinghouse brake earlier on. This big one here, this is the boiler pressure gauge, so that would be very much being looked at back in those racing days. But the big important piece of work here, let's come back a little bit, is this big handle here. This is a regulator. This is a little bit like the, I guess, the accelerator of your car. Or another way to look at this, it's like a ginormous tap, because you turn it open, on, and shut off to control the flow of steam. Obviously very, very important in terms of getting this locomotive to operate at its best of its capabilities. So it's quite a hard engine to drive, this apparently, so you need a really experienced crew to manage it. But if you got it right, this would really pay dividends. Either side of that, you've got the water gauges. Got to keep your eye on those, certainly. A couple of brakes here, air and vacuum brakes we've got. And then effectively the gears here, the reverser, this big handle here, which has got the lever, you can see here for putting your hand down there to put the lever on, but it's a bit of a heft to get that going. So let's come down and you'll see the way you could ratchet through, effectively like the gears here. But if you need a little bit of extra power, how about this, a little footrest. So you can put your foot up there to really hoik away at this. You need a bit of strength to do this piece of work. In some ways, the most important part, certainly for the driver, is this little thing here. Looks like a little seat, but actually it's a nice little storage space. That's quite handy for storing your sandwiches in, or as they would call them up here in Scotland, your piece. So what kind of piece you'd have there? Well, it's a geely piece or not, I don't know. That's only something that Scottish people would get. And then let's just come through the glass here. Just to give you a sort of sense of the view you get looking down the boiler. Imagine going up Beatwick Summit over 1,000 feet. God, just imagine it. It must have been quite a spectacular scene. And if I just pull back a little bit, you'll see this chain coming down. So what's that all about? Well, that's the whistle of the Caley Hooter, which we saw outside. So you had to do that, just pull that down, of course. Let's just swing around. Let's look right to the back of the tender now. No coal in here today, of course. You can imagine this just loaded up with coal. In fact, in the 1950s, there's a fantastic photograph of the locomotive, I think at Victoria Station, where the coal's been painted white. I don't think there's any particular reason for that, other than it looks nice, and maybe reflecting the fact that this was a Royal Pilot engine. So did all sorts of weird things with paint for royal connections. Supposedly in the 19th century, one of the Scottish railway companies even painted a locomotive tartan. Not the famous tartan paint or the infamous tartan paint story, but painted to look like a tartan effect. People do strange things for royal visits. So that's the tender. Not the original tender, but very much the tender that's been with this locomotive for most of its working life. So Caley 123 is a remarkable engine. It's got a tremendous story. It's a celebrity engine long before Flying Scotsman was even built. It deserves its place in railway history. It's also a very personal story for me as well. This is my late father's favourite locomotive. In fact, he took some wonderful photographs of it back in the 1950s when it was still in operation, particularly at Caledonian Station on the famous Caledonian line, which sadly closed in the 1960s. My father's uncle was the station master at Caledonian. So for me, this is a very personal locomotive as well. This really does touch my own heart. But it's something that touches the hearts of many, many people here in Glasgow, because it's a great symbol of this wonderful city and its great legacy of railway history. And for me, this is probably the most beautiful locomotive to survive into preservation. And I'm sure many of you will dispute that and have your own favourites, so please do comment in the comments below. But for me, there is only one winner for the most beautiful locomotive, and it is one behind me. In fact, I guess it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. Well, we do hope you've enjoyed this edition of Curator with a Camera. Many thanks to our friends here at the Riverside Museum for accommodating us. And if you have enjoyed it, please remember to like and subscribe. Very much appreciated if you do. And look out again for more editions of Curator with a Camera coming your way shortly.